Hey, Orchard Grove family. I hope you're doing well. And I want to talk to you today about navigating the new normal. And definitely that's what we're all doing is things are not as they normally are for us. And so we want to talk about how we can navigate. And I'm coming to you from a new spot. This is the Surf Shack, or basically a shed from Lowe's. But this is where I hang out in the summertime. And we're not quite there yet, but I thought a change of pace might do us good. And I want to read a scripture, and I just want to explore together the new environment that we're in. And I want you to know that this is a pattern that happens not only throughout our lifetimes, but this happens throughout everyone's lifetime. And this goes back to the scriptures. And so I was thinking of the story of when the children of Israel are taken from slavery in Egypt all the way to the promised land. And between slavery and the promised land, they were sandwiched in the middle was years of wandering in the wilderness or the desert. And it was 40 years that they wandered, and it was a transitional time for them. And a lot of times, what we're used to can overtake the good that God has in front of us. So the good was the promised land that God had in front of them, but they kind of got stuck on what they knew. Even though what they knew was slavery, it was stable and it was normal. And now going out and leaving that was new. And so they struggled. They struggled a lot. They struggled with their new surroundings. They struggled with the food. They were used to a certain kind of food. They struggled with their leaders, Moses, go figure, right? And they struggled even with their freedom. They weren't slaves. Now they were free. And so they had to figure out what do I do now that I'm free? And that's, by the way, where we get the Ten Commandments from, because as they come out of slavery, they're just a mob of people, and they have to create some kind of order, structure, rules. And so they just start with some very basic rules to just give some order to their newfound freedom. So they were in slavery, that they were in Egypt, and they come out and everything's brand new. Now they're in the wilderness. They were slaves, now they're free. And so this stepped into a brand new situation that was unfamiliar and a little bit chaotic to them, and they were trying to find their footing. And Moses was giving them these rules to give them a footing, something stable to kind of hold them together. By the way, I've heard from a few people, I thought it was pretty good. They said, put some kind of structure in your life during these days, right? So get up at a certain time, or get a couple of routines going. So put a little order in your life, and it might help you navigate the new normal. So Moses was not the charismatic leader, perhaps. It says in the scripture that he was slow of speech. So maybe he was a little gun shy about talking, and the whole thing might have been just difficult for him. But nonetheless, he was taking people to a better place. He was taking them to a better place. They say, good leaders can take us where we want to go. But a great leader can take us where we don't yet know we want to go. And I think Moses was a great leader. He was taking people to places that they hadn't even thought of yet. And perhaps God's taking us all to such a better place, a place we haven't thought of yet. And I think what we have to do is just be careful and listen to the rhythms, listen to what's happening around us. Maybe God's speaking to you about a place that he wants to take you in your life as well. Now, this place was new, and the journey through the wilderness was absolutely unfamiliar territory to them. Now, they wandered for 40 years, but if you ever look at the geography, it certainly wasn't a 40-year trip. It's about 250 miles, probably a couple of weeks journey. Why 40 years? Why so long? And I think this is the key thing, right? If you were in the Wednesday night little video that we did, we talked about how Jesus was in the wilderness for 40 days, right? And this is certainly a symbolic number in the scriptures. It's used over and over again. Probably Jesus was in the wilderness for 40 days to show a successful version of what the Israelites didn't do so well and the 40 years in the wilderness. So the wilderness, the desert, what's it all about? Well, really, the desert The word in Hebrew is midbar, and it's similar, the same word that you find a pasture for a flock, to pasture your flock. So in other words, the desert or this wilderness was a place you took the sheep. So imagine this. There's a shepherd, and the shepherd's in the village, and he takes the sheep out of the village, out into the wilderness, right, to the midbar, to an area. And this area is unsettled, it's wild. But here's the key thing, and this is what we should focus on. The key thing is in this desert or in this wilderness, it's unfamiliar, it's untamed, but there's enough. That is to say, it's sparse. There isn't a lot there, but there's enough to sustain you. And this is the message that keeps getting reiterated over and over again in this story. It's sparse, but there's enough. And so I want to read to you from Deuteronomy, just a couple of verses. Deuteronomy 8, it says this: "Now remember how the Lord led you all the way through the desert those 40 years to humble you," right? To humble us. Isn't that true? We get humbled so quickly, don't we? We're just cruising along and we think we had the world by the tail, and then something else happens that we didn't see coming, right? So humility is such an important thing because it keeps us grounded, and it keeps us reliant and interdependent, not only with God, but with others. And humility is something that happens to us over and over and over again throughout the cycle of life. So it was to humble and to test. And then it says, "He humbled you, causing you to hunger, and then feeding you with manna, which neither you nor your fathers had known." In other words, this was going to be a different kind of food, something that they were unfamiliar with, a new normal. And it was normal. It was going to come every day, right? The manna came every day. It wasn't extra. They couldn't stockpile it, as we learned in the story. Once they tried to stockpile it, it was filled with maggots. So you just had to go out every day. It was a daily thing. There was just enough. Think about this. And I know people are struggling, and some of you are doing fantastic, and some of you are hurting, and some are just kind of lost and confused and everywhere in between. But you know what? If you just focus on today, there's enough for today. And that's what Jesus kept trying to teach us, the same exact lesson. Just focus on one day, today. And you know what? Don't worry about what yesterday was or what tomorrow might be. There's enough for today. There's enough. And if you focus on that, that's good. And then it says that to teach you that man doesn't live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. And it says this: your clothes didn't wear out, and your feet didn't swell during these 40 years. In other words, he was saying that God just carried you through, right? He just all the way through, God carried you. And I know that through this transition time, whatever this is, God's going to carry you. He's going to carry us all through. We're going to get through to the other side. Now, the wilderness was a transition. It was a transition from slavery to the promised land. And sometimes the seasons of our life are transitional seasons, right? They're just meant to get you from this to this. And probably many of you have had this experience in your life, and you've gone through a transitional time. A friend of mine had a house, but he bought a lot. He wanted to have a nicer house, so he sold his house and he moved into an apartment, lived in an apartment so he could build a newer house. So you sacrifice. It's a transition. The apartment, this is the apartment season of your life, right? And that's okay. We all go through those. And smart people, wise people, they realize there are transitions. And that's how life goes. But the transition brings you through to something better. So let me go back to the 40 years of wandering. Why did it take them then 40 years? Well, it was because God wanted to teach them something. Right? So in every season of our life, there's a chance to learn. There's a chance to grow. And we can learn something in this season. And it's kind of like, you get the story in the scripture that because they didn't learn the lesson, they had to repeat the class, right? So they had to keep repeating it until they understood the lesson. And here we are. There are lessons to be learned in this season of our life, right? And there are things that can teach us to rely on God instead of on ourselves, right? And it's like a re-education. The whole wilderness thing was re-educating. And as I've said many times, re-educating is very different than educating. Educating is like we're teaching Charlie all these things, right? We're teaching her the ABCs, we're teaching her these songs, and she's just like a sponge, just soaking it up. That's education. Re-education is a completely different animal. You have to unlearn things that you already believe, you're convinced are true. You don't even think of them in your head, you think of them in your heart. This is how it is. This is how it's supposed to be. And then everything gets turned upside down. And now you need a re-education. Re-educations are brutal, right? Think of a re-education like boot camp. I've never been, so you should talk to someone who has, but all I've seen is movies and heard stories. But let's take the typical movie. You get off the bus and the drill sergeant is there just ripping you apart, laying into you, tearing you down. And the reason I guess they do that is because they want to tear down the old so that they can re-educate you, right? They got to tear you down so that they can build you back up. Indoctrinate you with something new, a completely new way of thinking, and they waste no time at boot camp. Well, it's the same thing. The wilderness, the transition times, the new normal is just basically God trying to tear away the old so he can rebirth the new. And it's a re-education process. He takes us to places in the wilderness where we're cut off from the old and the familiar so we can reach out to something that's better and brand new. By the way, just as an aside, I'm not a professional, but maybe just a pastoral observation, from pastoring. I think we need in the military to somehow have a reverse boot camp for our military brothers and sisters that leave and come back. And here's what I mean. I mean, you get so indoctrinated into a command and control. You have an authority figure, and then you're just told, you just do yes, sir. It's yes, sir, or yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am. It's always yes and absolutely and right now. And so they get used to that. And then you come back to the civilian world, and that's not how life is. And a lot of military families, and this is not their fault per se, a lot of military families struggle with their family and their home relationships, their husbands and wives, because they're used to it. The word is given, and then it's the immediate obedience. But that's not how toddlers are. That's not how teenagers are, and that's not how husbands or wives are. It's a lot more nuanced than that. And it's sad, but we have to help educate and re-educate people to say, wait, this is a different culture now. That worked for warfare, but this is civilian life. This is home life. Anyway, as an aside, maybe somebody can look into that for me, because I think, gosh, there's so much that needs to be said about then re-educating again. So think about this season of life, right? You're transitioning, and the reality is you're leaving something that was familiar, right? Familiar, but not better. And so when they get into the wilderness, they start to complain. They complain against Moses. What kind of food is this? And you're going to kill us out here, and this is no good. And it got difficult, and it was uncomfortable, right? But Moses was trying to take them to something better. They kept wanting to go back. So here's the key. When you're in the transition, you just need to be patient. Be patient and let yourself go through it to something that is better. Now, let's talk about some of the seasons. There are all kinds of seasons. So in a basic farming cycle, you have a season where you plant, and then you wait. In the summertime, you watch it grow. And then in the fall, you harvest. And then in the winter, everything dies off, and you rest and you recuperate, and then you prepare, and then you start all over again. So there are appropriate activities for each season. In the spring, you should be out there planting, right? In the fall, you should be harvesting. And the same thing is true in our life. there are certain seasons and certain activities are appropriate. So it would be foolish of us to think to go out in the spring and try to harvest. That's the wrong season. It's not the season to do that. You shouldn't go in the winter and try to plant. You got to wait till the spring to plant. In other words, pay attention to what season of life you're in because they change. And this is what we get in trouble. We try to resist change. Like, no, we're not going to let the season change. But it's going to change anyway. And wise people, they tune in and they go, wait a minute. This is a different season, right? You have a different season with your kids. You have a different season of relationships. You have a different seasons financially. Isn't this true, right? You have the seasons where you have almost nothing. You have the seasons maybe where you have extra. You have the seasons where you should be saving because there's extra. You have the seasons where you should be giving. And all of these seasons of life, they keep coming and they keep going. There are seasons where we age, right? You have the youthful season. You get older and your body gets a little stiffer and starts to break down a little bit more, but you're wiser, hopefully wiser. And so you have different seasons, and we should age gracefully and say, this is a new season that I'm in. So pay attention to the season and say to yourself, what in this season could I learn? What can I learn? What might God be trying to teach me in this season? I think I was reading something the other day and I jotted down a few notes because I thought this might help some of us. But in certain seasons, we have to let go. And so this transition, I think, is a great time to think about things to let go of. Letting go of Egypt, right? Because you're going to move to something better. So when you're navigating a new normal, pay attention. What are the things I could let go of? And I jotted a few down. First, maybe this would be a good time. Stop trying to please everybody. We all do it probably, some more than others, but trying to make everybody happy all the time. Now, nothing wrong with making people happy. I think general attitude of trying to be helpful is good. But that can be a prison. That can be its own cage of slavery, is when you're obsessed about making sure everyone is always happy with you. Guess what? They're not going to be. And if you can let go of trying to please other people all the time, and just realize, do your best, and try to be good to people as much as possible. And then there's times you just can't be you just can't be there for everybody. You can't fix everybody's problem. You can't do everything for everyone, and that's okay. Just do your best and then let it go. Here's another one. Let go of the need to identify yourself with what you do. Now think about this one. This really struck me as good. We all identify ourselves with what we do. It's just sort of human nature. If you're out on a golf course and they'd start striking up a conversation and they say, well, what do you do? And then you say, I am a farmer, I am a pastor, I am a teacher, right? And so you start to say, this is what I am, who I am. But that's really not who you are. That's just what you do. And they get tied together. But that is something that can really hurt you. Sometimes in times like this, people lose their job and then they lose their identity. And that shouldn't be. You're bigger than that, And so what you start to realize is I'm not defined by what I do. And some of you would love to do something different, right? And you would love the chance to show there's something different on the inside of you. But remember this, you're not identified by what you do. Third, let go of unhealthy thoughts about yourself. Unhealthy thoughts about yourself. If you're blessed with a good image of yourself in your head, you're very fortunate. Some people just can't get that through into their head where they start to realize that they are valuable and that they are incredibly important individuals. And so they have unhealthy thoughts about themselves. And a lot of times it's a product of their upbringing, and if you've been told so many times in your life that you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you're not important, whatever it is, then you start to believe it. In fact, it's true in the story, the story we've been using, the children of Israel, they had a slave mentality. It just wasn't just that they were slaves, but they had a mentality of slavery. So they thought of themselves as slaves. Think about how important this is. Once you believe that about yourself, then you're easy to subjugate. So they had to throw off, and it says in there, to roll off the reproach of Egypt, not think of yourself as a slave anymore. You have to think of yourself differently. This would be a great time in your life to re-educate your mind about yourself. Now, a couple others. Let go of some people. There are some people in your life that are hurting you that you just need to let go of. Now, I'm not talking about working through difficult things and working through difficult relationships. Sometimes we very much need to do that, and that's true. But we also know there are times in our life when we just need to let go. It's just not going to work. It's just not meant to be. It's not helpful. It's toxic, or whatever the words are. And so you just have to let it go. And that's okay. You're going to be a freer person. You can just move on in your life. There was a lot of moving on that had to happen in this story. But the only way to get to the promised land was you had to keep letting go. Here's a little practical one. Let go of some of the stuff in your life. The stuff, the clutter, the extra, right? And I don't know about you, but I took a chance to clean out some extra stuff and clutter, and it's amazing how much stuff you can accumulate, you know. But I was reading a book one time, and they were talking about this. It made me think, you know, when they traveled through the wilderness, they didn't have any furniture, you know. They had to just, whatever they had, they carried with them. Probably they rolled out little mats or whatever, but you had to stay. Some of you that have camped and hiked and did those kinds of activities, you realize you need to pack light when you're in this. And so what you realize is there's very few things that you really, really, really have to have. And so you can start to let some stuff go. Realize I don't need all of this stuff to be happy. And it gives you the ability, when you let go of stuff, it gives you the ability to focus more. And you get to understand this is what matters the most. All right, two more. Let go the desire for safety and security. Safety and security. That's all what we all want. We want to get our hands wrapped around. I know how this is going to go. I know how this ends. The wilderness was unfamiliar. They didn't know where they were going. They didn't know what was going to happen. And I wanted to read a little something that I thought was just so good. This was by an author. He was talking about what he called unexplored territory. This is a psychologist, and he said, unexplored territory are these new regions of life that you haven't been before, like chaos, like going past the known, the boundaries, right? And every time you do this, it feels uncertain and uneasy. And so it's like when you have this 9-to-5 job and you have a paycheck every Friday, and you know the kids are always getting A's, and you know, everything's just good and regular and certain, and we latch onto that. But sometimes the best thing that happens to us is when we get pulled away from that, and we get pulled out into the unknown, into the unfamiliar. You know, we sing that song sometimes, like where Peter steps out of the boat and onto the water, right? Into the chaos, into the unfamiliar. But that's where, right? That's where the miracles are. That's where the amazing stuff starts to happen in your life. And so it's this, there's always the tension where we want to stay in safety. We want to stay in security. But we have to get over that so that we can go to the miraculous, so that we can go to the unbelievable. And this is the call, right? This is the call that we keep getting. Now here, one more. Let go, and this is so good, right? Let go of the projected self so you can have your true self. Here's the projected self. We talked about this the other day. If you remember when I had the shadow, Charlie learning her shadow, right? And that's your projected self, or your ego. That's the thing that you put out there. And then there's the real you. The shadow is not the real you, but that shadow can look huge, right? It can be way out there, can be a lot bigger. And so what happens is we start to identify ourselves with that shadow. and we protect that shed. This is the image we're putting out. But think about that. Let go of the projected self so that you can become and you can find the real you God meant you to be. Now think about this. There is gold right there. If you can dial into this, there's the real you when you think about what deep down in your heart, what you love, what you have passion for, what you truly care about. Not what everyone else around you expects, not what everyone thinks, not what society's trying to put on you, but what's deep down inside of you. So this is a great time. Don't you see? Transitions are times where you can let go. And I want to encourage everybody, ask yourself, what can I let go of? You know, what's holding me down and holding me back? As we go through this transition, I don't know how long it's going to last. It might be a couple more weeks. It might be a couple more months. I really have no idea. But the children of Israel didn't know. They didn't know. But they had to make a fundamental decision. And here was the fundamental decision. Do I believe the promised land or what's in front of me is better than what was behind me? That's the only question. How long the wilderness is, I think is at some point it's immaterial. Then if you say, what's ahead of me is better, then you just patiently keep going forward one day at a time. And here's the thing. Learn from the journey. Take in all the lessons that you can take in. Let God speak to you. Let God challenge you. Let God change you. And learn to let go of all of the old, right? All the old, so that you can embrace the new. When they finally get to the promised land, think about it. When they finally get there, it says there were homes already built. There were wells that were already dug. It was move, as they say, move in ready, right? So I think you're going to go to a situation in your life that's move in ready. Now, maybe this stay-at-home order, it hasn't affected you the way it's affected other people. But you know what? This message will apply at some point in your life where you'll go through a major transition. It'll be a transition. And I don't know if you know this, but now we're 1 week out from Easter. And think about it. When John wrote his gospel, he meant for people to understand that on that Sunday morning, that was the first day of a brand new world, right? John's gospel, and John, he teaches that this is a brand new world that's opening up and brand new life that's in front of you. It was like day one of a brand new journey. So here's what my prayer and hope for you is today. You would understand that you can't always control, you can't always know, you can't always predict, you can't always prepare. But what you can do is trust and learn, right? Trust and learn. And through this transition, just know this, there's enough for every day. God's going to carry you through, right? And when you get there, it's going to be move-in ready. God has something better prepared and in store for each and every one of us. Can we say a prayer together? Lord, thank you for walking with us through the wilderness. Things that we don't understand, but you've gone before us, and you'll make a way for us, and you'll take care of us every step of the way. We thank you. Give us the grace to let go of all that is old so we can embrace what you have for us. In Christ's name, amen. God bless you, Orchard Grove. Happy Sunday.